Sorry, insulin resistance, what is that? That is when your body no longer produces insulin? Or?
No. Insulin resistance is when your body is no longer responding to insulin. So it's like you're waiting for the phone to ring and it's ringing, but you can't hear it, right? Like you're not getting the signal. And so your cells are not responding to the insulin that's made. Insulin is really helping your body move the glucose out, right? Move it out of your bloodstream, where it can cause a lot of damage if it sits around.
And if you put too much pressure on the insulin system, then it kind of shuts down.
Eventually shuts down.
And the thing that puts too much pressure is consuming too much glucose or too much activity.
Too much glucose, refined glucose can do that. Visceral fat is one of the, I would say, bigger causes of insulin. It's actually one of the major causes of insulin resistance, because if you are physically active and eating a lot of glucose, that glucose is going to your muscles. Physical activity makes your muscles very responsive to glucose without needing insulin. The transporters that transport glucose are super responsive when you exercise. That's why physical activity, and this is what I was getting at with parents, is so important. The visceral fat is the really big concern with insulin resistance. This is the thing that, again, it's like people don't even know about it. A lot of people are thinking about glucose and, I got to watch my glucose, and that's all fine. I mean, yes, to some degree that's also playing a role, but it's the visceral fat that's the real underlying problem that's causing you to become insulin resistant. You mentioned parents have it bad because they're stressed out and they don't get sleep. I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor when I became a new mother. I was appalled by my fasting blood glucose and by my postprandial blood glucose levels. Never.
Postprandial.
Postprandial means after a meal.
Okay.
So your levels go obviously much higher after you eat a meal versus in the morning when you haven't had anything to eat. Mm-hmm. And my levels were so high, it was pre-diabetic. And I couldn't believe it. And it's not like I'm eating, drinking Cokes and eating terrible, right? But there was a period of time when I'm not as physically active, particularly in the first couple of months. It's really, that's the time when you're kind of just in this cave. I immediately was looking into the scientific literature and found that high-intensity interval training and exercise can help almost negate most of those poor effects of causing insulin resistance and causing your glucose regulation to not be normal. That's the good news for parents, is that new parents should prioritize exercise. And exercise does cause you to lose visceral fat. It's not just any type of exercise, really has to be aerobic, and the more vigorous, the better.
So for people that don't know what that means, aerobic and vigorous.
Yeah, so what I mean is resistance training and lifting weights don't really move the needle in terms of helping you lose visceral fat. It does help you improve your metabolism. It does help with glucose, sensitivity and all that, because your muscles are going to be more sensitive to take the glucose in. But if you want to lose visceral fat, you're going to have to do running, jogging, cycling, swimming. You want to get your heart rate up a little more.
Why? It's
energy expenditure. It plays a role in getting you to that more caloric deficit, and that's better. So that's one way. And the other thing is any weight loss program. So intermittent fasting, caloric restriction, even GLP-1 receptor agonists and all the classes of GLP-1, anything that is going to make you lose weight, lose fat. Visceral fat's one of the first to go. And in fact, people on these weight loss programs or even on exercise training program, visceral fat's the first fat to go. And so you can lose it quite quickly.
So on this point of fasting, are you a fan of fasting to combat visceral fat? And also, could you give me your thoughts on being in a ketogenic state as it relates to visceral fat?
Yeah. People, when they think about intermittent fasting, they kind of think about, one thing, and they think about weight loss, right? But there's a lot going on here, and I like that you mentioned being in a ketogenic state, because there's also a metabolic switch that happens. This metabolic switch from burning carbohydrates and glucose to burning fatty acids and getting in ketosis, right? That's a metabolic switch, and it's very important. There are two different things happening here. But intermittent fasting is essentially a good tool that people can use to reduce their calorie intake without having to count their calories. That's why I like it. You can lose weight by counting your calories and reducing your calorie intake. I personally think that's a lot of work. Some people love doing it, and that's great. I think whatever works for a person. But The way in which intermittent fasting helps people lose visceral fat is by reducing calorie intake. That's what I'm getting at. It's like a tool that some people like to use because I like it, for one, because I can not think, I'll skip one meal, making sure I get enough nutrients in the meals that I eat and protein in the meals I eat. But I'll skip a meal and it gets me in a caloric deficit without having to think about and count everything. So it's easier on me.
To fast
Versus counting calories.
And
yes.
how do you do that?
I like to fast in the morning. And the reason I like to fast in the morning is for the exact reason you mentioned. And that is the ketosis, which I like to call the metabolic switch. You're not eating while you're sleeping, obviously. So if you're sleeping for 8, if you're in bed for 9 hours, 10 hours, you're not eating during that time. And it takes about 10 to 12 hours for your liver to deplete glycogen. Glucose that's been taken up by the liver is stored as glycogen so that you can then use it for energy later if you don't have energy coming in, right?
So the glycogen is like the petrol station.
Yes.
So it runs out of petrol.
That's right. And so it
switches to diesel.
And then switches to diesel. And so after that switch, that metabolic switch, when you deplete that glycogen while you're sleeping or while you're not eating after about 12 hours. And by the way, this is all relative because it depends on the kind of foods you eat and how physically active you are. So if you eat a lot of high carbohydrate, refined sugar stuff, you might take even longer to deplete your glycogen because you're putting a lot of input in there. You keep filling up the fuel tank, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're eating things that are more low carb, you might deplete your glycogen sooner. So when you deplete your glycogen, you get into this metabolic switch because your body still needs energy, but there's no glucose around, right? So you start to switch to, your fatty acids are mobilized. They come out of your adipose tissue. This is why people lose fat. They come out of the visceral fat. You start to use those fatty acids and burn them as energy. And as a product of that energy, you're making ketosis. And the reason I like to do this in the morning is because then I can really get into that ketotic state where if I'm fasting, I fast for about 16 hours a day, and then I eat my meals within 8 hours a day. Typically, that's what I do. The reason I like to be in that metabolic switch state is many reasons, actually. One, the ketones themselves are providing my brain with energy, very easily utilizable energy, but they're also acting as a signaling molecule to my brain going, hey, this is a stressful time. There's no food. You better be cognitively sharp. You got to find that food. You got to know what you're doing, right? It's an evolutionary adaptation. Humans for thousands of years were going through this metabolic switch because we didn't have Instacart. We didn't have Postmates. We didn't have all Uber Eats, right? We had to find our food. We had to hunt our food. And we didn't always do that, right? And so when I get into that metabolic switch state, I feel it. I feel more cognitively sharp and I feel less anxious, which is part of it because those ketones also help increase something called GABA. That's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's essentially, you can just think of it as it helps you feel calmer. When I feel calmer, I'm more cognitively focused because it's the background anxiety is down, right? It's you can focus. And so I love being in that state in the morning because that's when I get my work done. I also like to be in that metabolic switch state. And this is why I like fasting in addition to, the fewer calories I'm consuming, right? Your body has to be in that fasted state to repair. If you're constantly in a fed states are important for anabolic growth. We need it to grow, right? But the repair state is also very important because with the growth comes damage. Damage comes along with that. And you want to repair that damage because damage will accelerate aging. And so I like to be and give my body enough time. I don't want to just wake up and eat where it's I've only barely depleted my liver glycogen. I'm not even in that repair state very long, right? I want to extend it a little bit. And so I like to have that repair process active. And that it is active fasting activates it, but also you have some amount of active repair going on even when you're in a fed state. It's just heightened when you're fasted. So those are the reasons I like intermittent fasting. I feel good when I do it. I also do a lot of training, not all of it. I do a lot of training fasted. Cardiovascular, aerobic endurance exercise, so running, biking, that stuff I like to do fasted. I'm not going for a 10-mile run. I'm going for a 3-mile run, right? I mean, so if I was going for a 10-mile run, I wouldn't be fasted. I would need some fuel. But there are multiple studies showing that if you do aerobic endurance training, this kind of running, cycling, swimming type of training, you actually have better adaptations if you're fasted versus fed.
What does that mean?
So much of the benefit from exercise, right? Aerobic exercise, when you're breathing in, you're working hard, is from the working hard, but your body responds to that, right? Because the working hard is causing inflammation, it's causing oxidative damage. And your body is responding to that by going, oh, we got to get better at this stuff. So you have anti-inflammatory pathways activated. You have antioxidant pathways activated. Your body needs to burn fat. You need fuel. And so if you're fasted, you get better at burning the fat and oxidizing the fat, and you continue to do that throughout the day better as well. So you have what are called mitochondrial adaptations that are better. You make more mitochondria. Mitochondria are very important little tiny organelles inside of most of our cells that make energy. And they're very important for everything. I mean, they're running our brains right now so we can talk, our heart, so we can breathe, our lungs, everything, right? And so exercise does make you increase the amount of those new mitochondria that you make that are young and healthy.
If you're fasted.
Both, even if you're not. But if you're fasted, it's even better.
This has been a big debate around whether this applies to both men and women. Should both men and women exercise fasted?
This is my read of the literature and my thoughts on this from also having experts that have studied male versus female responses to exercise. First and foremost, how do you feel when you exercise fasted? If you feel terrible, that's a sign. I think listening to your body is the most important thing that you can do. There are times when I have to eat before I exercise, and I listen to my body. That's it. I'm going to eat. When it comes to women versus men and doing exercise fasted, it also depends on, are you doing a 30-minute run? Are you doing a 2-hour run? If you're doing a 2-hour run, you need to fuel. That's a lot. That's a big stress. When it comes to a 30-minute run, you don't really necessarily need to. Now, the problem with women is that they're often, if you're in too much of a caloric deficit and you don't eat enough food within, afterwards, you're not refueling enough, and you're doing very, very long, high volume types of exercise, then you can basically disrupt your, some of your hormones, your follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. These things will make you become amenoretic. So you basically stop ovulating and you stop getting your menstrual period.
And what's the evolutionary reason for that? What's going on there?
Because your body's like, there's not enough food and energy around to sustain a growing fetus,
so it
growing
starts
baby.
shutting down.
So it's basically like, hey, we're not going to allow you to have a baby, basically. So you stop ovulating, right? So you're not making those eggs.
Is this often the case with women who exercise a lot and no longer have their menstrual cycle?
First of all, this is not a common thing. This is something that happens in, like athletes, elite athlete women that are not eating enough food. Like I did this to myself when I was in my early 20s, and I was racing marathons, and I was running 10 miles a day, 8 to 10 miles a day, 5 days a week. And then I was eating carrots and hummus, and, I wasn't fueling myself. And I did this to myself too. So how do you feel if you train fasted? Do you feel terrible? Don't do it. If you want to train somewhat fasted, go for the protein shake with a little bit of almond milk or something like that, where you're not eating a full meal, but you're getting something. So I do a lot of my training fasted, and that has helped me. I'm 47 years old and perimenopause.
You're in phenomenal shape.
Thank you. Thank you. But I did notice, of course, as I started to reach that perimenopause part of my life, that I had to be a little bit more aggressive and put a little bit more effort in to not get this fat right here on my belly, because it started coming up and I didn't want it. It wasn't an option for me.
Speaking of studies done for women, I've heard you talk in the past about the SWAN study, which kind of relates to what you just said there, when relating to women and visceral fat. And they found that women experience an accelerated increase in visceral fat starting 2 years before their final menstrual period.
Yeah, because that's when their estrogen is it's plummeting, right? You're just going off a cliff because you're about to go into menopause.
Again, what age would that be?
Average age of menopause is between 50, 52 for women. There's a lot of things that can affect your reproductive lifespan, your ovarian aging, I guess we can call it. And unfortunately, one of them is the age you were when you got your menstrual period. So if the younger you were, the younger you're going to be when you experience menopause. So also when your mother experienced menopause is very, very indicative of when you're going to experience it. But Lifestyle and diet play a role too. Obesity accelerates ovarian aging, so you're more likely to go into menopause earlier with obesity. Also, these chemicals that we're exposed to, and we can talk about those as well, a lot of these endocrine disrupting chemicals affect the age of menopause as well and accelerate that. So in some cases, women go into menopause 2 years earlier than they would have otherwise.
And you're 47.
And a half.
And a half. And the data that I'm looking at here says when we think about perimenopause, it usually starts in mid-40s, which is the age range you're in. This is where the 8 to 10% annual visceral fat increase begins.
It is. And I know. Yeah. I can tell you from people in my life that I've seen going through this, it's pretty sudden that you'll see someone in your life that's a woman that's going through perimenopause and maybe hasn't had any other symptoms yet, so they haven't really seeked out any treatment. Now you can try to do some hormone replacement therapy as well to help with that, but they start to gain visceral fat and it shows up around the belly quite rapidly. And I noticed this in myself. It almost feels overnight, seriously. This is the only symptom that I noticed in myself where it was like all of a sudden my belly was like growing and, not super, super large, but enough where I was like, there's something wrong. It's not even necessarily reflected if you get hormone tests because mine all seem normal. The thing is that the estrogen, when it drops, that estrogen is so important for telling your body to store energy differently, not around the organs, but to make it around, other parts of your body, like your thighs and your butt, right? Like your adipose tissue. And so when that estrogen goes down and declines, it's like, boom, it starts to go right to the belly. So that is why, for me, intermittent fasting has been really important. Like with any weight loss or calorie restriction protocol, you do need to make sure you're getting enough protein because that's important for muscle, right? Muscle growth and preventing atrophy of your muscle. And you need to also do resistance training. That also is a very important signal for muscle because the problem is some people calorie restrict and eat fewer meals and then they're not getting enough protein and they're not training and they start to lose muscle in addition to fat. And you don't want to do that. You want to kind of just lose the visceral fat and keep the muscle, ideally keep gaining muscle.
And for men, I was reading that testosterone and growth hormone typically peak in their late 20s. So I guess mine's peaked already. And starting at age 30, testosterone drops roughly 1% a year. So between the age of 25 and 65, men typically see a 200% increase in their visceral fat, even if their total weight stays the same. So, is that linked to the testosterone decline? Is that what's going on there? What's causing it?
Yeah. I mean, testosterone you burn, even if you're gaining visceral fat, it helps you burn it. It's also why some women that are in perimenopause want to do testosterone because it helps them burn the visceral fat. So it is linked to testosterone decline as well. But also as men are aging, they become more sedentary. They tend to eat a little bit. They're consuming more calorie. Like all these things are hand in hand. So it's not just like a one punch, right? It's like multiple angles are kind of all compounding and coming together. Whereas you could get away with it a little bit easier when you're younger because the testosterone is helping you burn it more. When you're declining, it doesn't work that same way. So even though you're gaining it, you're not burning it as quickly. So you start to have a net gain in it, if that makes sense.
So going back up to the top then, we were talking about things you can do to lower your visceral fat. And we talked a little bit about exercise, sleep, diet. Is there anything else in that category?
Yeah, I think those are the main ones. Obviously avoiding excess alcohol consumption.
Yep.
And also the stress.
Yeah, we talked. Yeah.
The stress, like, trying to relaxation techniques, buffer that stress. That's a big one. It's an amplifier.
Yeah, people don't talk enough about visceral fat. They look at other markers.
No, well, most people just want to lose weight and look good.
Yeah.
Or, they look at, HbA1c, your long-term glucose, or they're looking at lipids. And visceral fat is just, it's insidious, right? It just starts increasing. You can't see it. You can't see it until all of a sudden belly, right? I mean, it's bad. And it affects the way you feel daily.
On this point of testosterone, why is it the case that testosterone seems to be dropping amongst men? I think it said something like, I wrote it down, yeah. Testosterone levels in men have dropped by up to 20% over the last 2 decades, which is quite terrifying.
It is. So, look, there's a lot of factors that can affect testosterone. I mentioned dietary factors, refined sugar. Sleep is a big one. People aren't getting enough sleep. Lack of sleep drops testosterone. Micronutrients, not getting enough zinc, for example. Zinc's very important for testosterone synthesis, and magnesium. Like there's important nutrient components, but I think the big player here is actually environmental. I think that we are being bombarded with what are called endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are man-made chemicals. A lot of them are part of plastic. They're made to help plastic be more durable or more robust, or they're water resistant. So there's probably 3 main endocrine disrupting chemicals that are found in our environment, mainly because they're in plastic, or they're also in things that are water resistant, oil resistant, fire resistant, flame retardant. BPA, bisphenol A, is one. Another one is phthalates, pH, phthalates. And the last one would be PFAS. These are the forever chemicals. These are the 3 main, I would say, players in terms of disrupting endocrine function, endocrine being hormones. Sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, but also thyroid hormone, very important for regulating our metabolism, for example.
Are they really causing a problem?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Because I'm looking at the picture you have there of PFAS, and it's got like a coat and shoes on there. You're telling me the clothes that I wear are having an impact on my hormones?
They can, but I think it's less of a direct effect and more downstream. So the PFAS chemicals, or the forever chemicals, they're used in things to make them oil resistant, stain resistant, water resistant. So the Teflon pans would be the biggest example. You remember those non-stick pans? They have Teflon. That has PFAS on it.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.